You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
Picture this. It's a bright, warm September morning in 1958. You're boarding commuter train number 3314 heading from Elizabeth to Jersey City across Newark Bay. The train is packed a microcosm of New York and New Jersey life. There's a former NYU law school dean, the Yankee second baseman George Snuffy, and dozens of everyday folks just trying to make it to work. Some, like Mr. Land, almost didn't make either considered skipping that ride altogether. Now, have you ever wondered how a routine commute can shift in an instant? We rarely think about it, but the ordinary is always just a moment away from the extraordinary. Among the crowd is George Barry, a lifelong freightman and expert in track signage. He's here by chance, tired from a family emergency. Most passengers exchange glances or retreat into newspapers, but for Barry, the day's about to become unforgettable. What's the first thing you do on a morning train? Maybe you scan for a seat, check your watch, or plan your day. No one expects disaster. But as you'll see, routine can sometimes hide the seeds of catastrophe. Let me ask, how many of us truly notice the signal's literal or figurative flashing warnings in our path? As we board this fateful train together, let's examine what happens when those warnings go unheeded. Keep those everyday details in mind, because they'll matter when we unpack how one of the most shocking train disasters in American history unfolded before anyone could react. As train 3314 barreled towards Newark Bay, George Barry noticed something alarming. The signal lights, those critical traffic control devices, flashed warnings that the drawbridge ahead was open. Now, a drawbridge is just what it sounds like, a section of track that lifts to let ships pass. The system is supposed to be foolproof, with interlocking signals that prevent a train from crossing when the bridge is raised. But imagine, 3 signals, all ignored by the engineer. Think of signals as the railroad's equivalent of red lights at an intersection, except here, they're backed by mechanical interlocks designed to prevent human error. Yet, the train is accelerating. Now, you might be thinking, maybe the signals malfunctioned? Actually, Barry and at least one other passenger confirmed they were working. So, was it complacency, confusion, or something more sinister? Let me tell you, in railroad operations, 2 terms matter. Fail-safe systems designed to default to safety in an emergency, and interlock, a mechanism that links different safety devices together. But on this day, both concepts failed to protect those on board. Why were these protections bypassed, and what happens when layers of safety become mere suggestions? Let's dig deeper into the moment everything went wrong. Suddenly, the impossible happens. The front of train 3314 plunges into Newark Bay. Water rushes in, and chaos erupts. Passengers are tossed, trapped, and fighting for their lives. George Barry finds himself pinned underwater, using seat arms as a desperate ladder, driven by the thought of his wife and children. The technical term for this kind of accident is derailment with immersion. The train leaves the rails and submerges. Imagine the force. As the car hits water, the internal air pressure literally blows clothing off passengers, turning the carriage into a deadly trap. Now, you might ask, why didn't Barry help others? Survival instinct, pure and simple. He later confessed to wishing he could if only he'd had the strength. Let me put you in that moment. The train is half sunken, bodies everywhere, water rising, your mind races, fight, flight, or freeze. Barry survived, but 48 others would not. The sheer randomness who escapes and who doesn't is haunting. This was not a slow-moving tragedy. It was sudden, violent, and left a community in shock. But the real mystery was just beginning. Why did every safety mechanism fail at once? As news of the disaster spread, panic gripped families along the train's route. Phones rang, or worse, didn't ring at all. Each hour of silence increased the dread. This wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was a human tragedy, magnified by uncertainty. One victim, a financier named Raphael Leon, was holding his wife's hand as the train hit water. In an instant, her grip slipped away forever. The press coverage was relentless, with images of submerged carriages and faces of the lost haunting the front pages. Now, you might be wondering, how did survivors cope? For many, survivors' guilt was a lifelong burden. Some, like the Yankee player's family, never received closure, only the cruel certainty of loss. Let me share a detail. Among the missing was the CEO of the nation's largest chemical company. The randomness of fate spared some and took others, shaking public confidence in a system people trusted. This disaster wasn't just about broken steel or failed signals. It was about families, futures, and the echo of unanswered questions. The demand for answers would soon trigger a massive investigation. In the immediate aftermath, the Interstate Commerce Commission and other agencies launched a sweeping investigation. Central to their inquiry were two pieces of technology: the speed recorder, a device like a train's black box that logs speed and brake using the signaling system. An expert named John J. Brown presented yards of paper tape showing the train braked 3-4 miles before the bridge, then shockingly accelerated to 45 miles per hour just before plunging into the bay. Imagine reviewing a black box after a plane crash-every blip tells a story. Now, you might be thinking, did the railroad try to dodge responsibility? Absolutely. Their lawyers challenged the testimony, arguing the data was inconsistent. But Brown clarified, after derailment, the axle spun freely, exaggerating the speed, but the core finding remained a sudden, fatal acceleration. Let's pause here. In crash analysis, terms like brake application, using the train's air brakes to slow or stop, and event recorder, logging critical data, are pivotal. The evidence painted a picture of both action and inaction brakes applied, then throttle pushed. Despite exhaustive cross-examination, the cause wasn't immediately clear, but the investigation's focus was narrowing. How could protocols and technology both fail so catastrophically? Let's talk about the dead man switch, a safety device requiring constant pressure from the engineer. If the engineer lets go, the train stops automatically. Sounds foolproof, right? But on train 3,314, the device was either missing or disconnected. Why is this so important? In modern engineering, the dead man switch is a failsafe. It's a backstop for human error or incapacity. Without it, if an engineer collapses at the controls, nothing stops the train. You might ask, wasn't the fireman there to help? Yes, and that's the second protocol, having a fireman trained to take over in emergencies. But for reasons still unclear, Fireman Peter Andrew didn't intervene. Let me illustrate. Imagine you're on a plane where the autopilot is off and both pilots are in the cockpit. If one passes out, the other is supposed to act. Here, both human and mechanical safeguards failed. This dual breakdown, missing dead man switch, unresponsive fireman became the crux of the investigation. It raised as many questions as it answered, fueling public suspicion and outrage. Let's zoom out to the railroad itself. The Central Railroad of New Jersey, CNJ, was hemorrhaging money, $450,000 a month, or about $5 million today. Underfunded operations often mean corners get cut, especially in maintenance and safety upgrades. The bridge was nearly 100 years old, but it had been renovated in 1927 with state-of-the-art safety features. Still, chronic financial strain meant that systems like the dead man switch weren't universally installed, and staff were overworked and under pressure. Now you might be wondering, does money really affect safety? Absolutely. When a company is on the brink, deferred maintenance and fatigued workers become the norm. Two technical terms matter here: budgetary constraints, limitations on spending, and preventive maintenance, regular upkeep to avoid breakdowns. Let me tell you a story. Many survivors reported seeing warning signals, but when every dollar is scrutinized, even vital upgrades can be overlooked or delayed. In essence, the disaster was as much about economics as engineering. So, was the tragedy inevitable? Maybe not. But CNJ's financial woes created a perfect storm, exposing systemic vulnerabilities that became fatal on that September morning. The media quickly zeroed in on the engineer, Lloyd Wilburn, painting him as reckless or negligent. Yet, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers pushed back, insisting that blaming a man who couldn't defend himself was unfair and premature. This is where narrative framing, how the story is told, shapes public perception. The term scapegoat means unfairly blaming one person for a broader failure. It's a classic pattern after major disasters. Now, you might be thinking, was Wilburn at fault? Autopsies revealed he had hypertensive heart disease, but ultimately drowned, meaning he was alive until the crash. There was no definitive evidence of incapacitation beforehand. Let me ask you, In a system with so many safety redundancies, should one person bear the blame? Or does the fault lie with management, policy, and long-standing neglect? This debate, individual versus institutional responsibility, remains unresolved. But it's clear that blaming Wilburn alone oversimplifies a complex web of failures. 3 separate inquiries by the Interstate Commerce Commission, the NJ Public Utilities Commission, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers concluded that the absence of a dead man's control was a primary cause of the disaster. As a result, the state mandated installation of dead man switches on all passenger locomotives. This is an example of retrospective regulation rules enacted after a tragedy to prevent recurrence. Now, you may be asking, did C&J comply? Yes, but only after being forced by law. They argued 2 crew members in the cab made the device redundant, but the events of train 3314 proved otherwise. Let's clarify 2 legal terms: settlement resolving lawsuits out of court to avoid public trial, and liability legal responsibility for damages. C&J settled all claims quietly, acknowledging their role without admitting fault. This episode reshaped railroad safety in New Jersey, but also left a lasting question: why must tragedy strike before meaningful reform happens? In the years that followed, C&J's Newark Bay lift bridge remained in use until 1978, then was demolished by 1980 after being deemed a navigational hazard. The damaged locomotives were rebuilt and put back into freight service, a testament to both resilience and pragmatism. A lift bridge is a type of movable bridge that raises a section to let ships pass. But after the wreck, even the bridge's modern features couldn't erase its dark legacy. Satellite images today show only a faint trace, where it once stood, proof of how infrastructure and memory can fade together. Now, you might wonder, what's left of the disaster? Legally, all cases settled. Physically, nothing remains. But psychologically, the memory endures among families and railroad historians. Let me bring it back to you. Why do we remember such tragedies? Because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about safety, responsibility, and the cost of neglect. So, as we close, let's resolve to learn from these stories. Even if the rails are long gone, the lessons they carry are as vital as ever. I'm Ryan Soash, and this has been a journey into the heart of the Newark Bay train disaster where ordinary moments became extraordinary history.